My name is Maria, and I am working at the Open University in the UK. My today's presentation will be about learning in online citizen science projects. A few words about me. I started my trip in citizen science with my PhD research early in my academic career by designing and evaluating online communities for citizen inquiries, 2 of them. And then I contributed to the design and evaluation of the Enquire platform, which is used for large-scale public experiments in psychology and social science initiated by communities, organizations, universities. In the last 3 years, I have been contributing to the Learn Cit Sci project that Thea will say a bit more about it in the next presentation. In particular, I have been looking at how young people participate and learn in the Zooniverse and iNaturalist platforms. And finally, I've been exploring the experience of teachers who have engaged their students in citizen science. So more or less, I've been involved in many aspects of citizen science, from school-based science to citizen social science, human-computer interaction, and of course, online citizen science. So my today's presentation is based on a paper we published recently in the Citizen Science Theory and Practice Journal. And the main research questions for that paper was to understand what methods they were used for capturing learning in online citizen science projects, and what were the learning impacts in online citizen science projects. So to answer our questions, we looked at empirical research published in English that was looking for learning impact in online citizen science. And the final result was 10 empirical research papers. So if you want to see a bit more about how we did that, you can scan the QR and you can have a look at the paper, probably later, not now. So the research papers, the empirical research papers, they were published in various journals and conferences in different disciplines, like in science communication, educational technology, human computation, also in conferences, educational and technology conferences. The projects reported in these research studies were nature and wildlife monitoring projects, such as the Bat Detective or Penguin Watch, also projects sensor-based researching via sensors, the pollutions, such as the ice packs, also weather-related and historical projects, astronomy-related projects, such as the very famous Galaxy Zoo, and projects related to other topics such as geology, neuroscience, and also some other projects that someone might think that they cannot contribute to participants' learning since they are only harnessing the power of their computers, but eventually they did. An example is the Boeing project. So the methods that these projects, that these research papers use to evaluate and explore the learning impacts were mainly self-reported learning methods, such as interviewing the participants, the scientists, using Likert scales and questionnaires, but also using standardized and not standardized instruments to understand whether there were any changes in the scientific attitude, epistemological beliefs, and understanding of nature of science of the participants before and after they took part in the project. There were also some methods that were focusing on identifying whether the participants' contribution were correct or not correct. There were other methods that were evaluating the actual knowledge of participants by using project questions, specific project questions, visual science quizzes, or other more project-specific surveys, for example, the Zooniverse astronomy concept survey. And then some other researchers used methods that didn't require direct interaction with the participants. Instead, they looked at their logged activities and their forum interactions, and they analyzed and categorized those activities based on frameworks. An example is the informal learning in Citizen-Science survey. So what were the main learning impact categories that came out of this review we made? Attitudes towards science was one of the learning impact categories. People reported positive impact in relation to their attitudes towards science. And in some other cases, this was because they already had a positive attitude. So they just reinforced this positive attitude. In some other cases, people reported that they had lowered self-perception after they took part in a citizen science project, and they came in contact with all the scientific methods and procedures. Some others reported that they are now thinking of science as a fun way to spend your free time. And some others even developed agent-centered presence. So they started contributing to local action groups, or even they contributed to the project promotion. Another learning impact category was nature of science. So some people understood that creativity can be an aspect in science and scientific process, and it's not just boring procedures. And they gained a new perspective on what science can be. And finally, they gained some knowledge on the scientific approaches. So they understood what the scientific phases are, what the procedures and instruments that are used in citizen science and in scientific process is, that science and the science process take time, and that there are debates and not just unique knowledge and one correct knowledge. Also, they realized that science can include failure as well, and that peer review is mandatory to conclude to robust knowledge. In relation to topic-specific knowledge, some correlational studies ended up that the more tasks a participant makes, the greater topic-specific knowledge they gain, or the more correct identifications they make. Also, some other studies reported that participants improved their science vocabulary, but in some other cases where the topic-specific knowledge was evaluated through quizzes and questionnaires, participants had low scores, or they had no difference before and after they took part. So topic-specific knowledge also depends by the topic. For example, they saw that in astronomy, they may have more increase in their topic-specific knowledge after taking part in a project. It depends on the public engagement techniques, how much you try to engage your participants in the project, the educational material, the interaction with the scientists, the use of external resources together with the project resources, and how much a participant is involved in the project activities. Of course, there were some issues with the pre-post test that we can discuss a bit later. Science knowledge. In relation to science knowledge, general science knowledge, correlation studies found that there was no relation between participation and general science knowledge in contrast to the topic-specific knowledge. But many studies reported that participants gained inquiry and science skills such as data annotation, pattern identification, question formation, and other similar skills. And finally, in online citizen science projects, studies reported that people beyond the scientific knowledge and the scientific literacy, they also gained other skills such as communication, community management, and digital literacy skills that were not initially like a target in the project. So I think my time, yeah, I have to wrap it up. So some discussion points and ideas for future research. Let's start with the opportunities that online citizen science project can provide us for researching and improving participation and learning. And for example, in online settings, we can have access to digitally enabled instruments. And in this way, we can access what the participant actually does and not have just a snapshot of their participation as we do in the field-based studies. So we can see their entire trip and evolution and understand how this can be improved. And then we also have, we can have some scaffolding mechanisms such as visualizations or guides that try to support the participants' contribution. And of course, we need to look at ways to further improve the digital skills of participants, because on the one hand, we provide them with the skills to better participate in the project, and on the other hand, we provide them with more skills beyond the scientific ones. But of course, there are some challenges in online citizen science learning. Mainly is because of the difficulty in using pre-post assessment. For those who try to evaluate learning in online citizen science, they will understand that it's difficult to keep the same participants like before and after and assess them on what they learn, because involvement keeps changing. So you may have some participants, like 100 participants this month, and the next month these participants may be totally different. So it's difficult to keep track of what they learned or not if they keep changing and leaving and coming. And also it's a more informal environment, so you may put them off if you try to evaluate what they learn. It's like you're trying to control whether they've done their lesson right or not. Of course, we can discuss some alternatives to pre-post tests, such as the retrospective pre-surveys and some citizen diaries. The latter one, actually, it's something I am working with. I am working on with the third presenter, Till. But we still have no feedback, so we cannot let you know yet whether it works or not. And finally, none of the reported studies included experimental studies, school settings, or long-term impact findings. Of course, this systematic review included publications up to May 2019, and I think I have seen a couple of school setting studies that used with Zooniverse students using Zooniverse. So maybe we need to update the catalog a bit more. So thank you, and if you have any more questions, I am happy for you to answer them later after we all finish.
Thank you very much, Maria. So Maria started us off with this broad view about what studies have found out so far. And now we're going to zoom in and hear more details about one specific study. And Maria has also been involved in this one, but Thea is going to present it because she was the lead author on this one. So yeah, now I hand over to you.
Can you see my screen? Yeah, great.
Yes.
Well, hi, thank you, Julia, for the introductions. I am Christothea Herodotou. I'm an associate professor at the Open University. I've been involved in citizen science for quite a while, I would say. At the moment, I am the academic lead of Enquire, a citizen inquiry platform we have designed in collaboration with the BBC at the Open University, and which aims to support citizens learning when they are engaging with the citizen science investigations. I'm also one of the co-PIs of the Learn-Cit-Sci project, and the work I'm going to present is coming from this project. If you want to read more about this work, it has been published open access in the Citizen Science Theory and Practice, and you can see the reference at the bottom of the screen. A few words about the Learn-Cit-Sci. This is a 4-year international research collaboration, which started back in 2017. It's a quite large project, and we are at the moment on the last year of it. It's a collaboration between 3 natural history museums in San Francisco and in London, and 3 universities, the Open University, the University of Oxford, and the University of California, Davis. Briefly, what we tried to do was to focus in particular on young people and what they are doing in citizen science programs that are managed by natural history museums. So the first year of the project, we tried to understand what they are doing, where are the young people and what they are doing in these projects. And by projects, I refer to projects who are happening in the field, like BioBlitzes, as well as projects that are hosted online, like projects on Zooniverse and project on the iNaturalist platform. So the next year we try to understand whether and what people are learning when they take part in these projects. And now on our last year, we are looking to see how we can change or alter the design of those projects to ensure that young people are more engaged and are actually learning something from taking part in citizen science activities. So the study I'm going to present is about Zooniverse. I don't know whether you're familiar or not with that platform, but it's maybe one of the most popular ones. So before we do the study, we looked into the types of participation the platform supports, the way it is designed. And what we came up with is that it resembles more contributory forms of participation as described by Shirk. The only difference is that instead of having people processing, collecting information by themselves, they are actually processing information scientists have put up on the platform. And then we looked into the different tasks, activities they are asked to do, and we found 4 different types of activities. Some are more easier than others. For example, the response to a question task, they are asked questions like, do you see a penguin on the picture? And the answer is yes or no. Other tasks, like the marking task, may be a bit more complicated because they are asked to mark up an area on an image. So what we tried to answer was what does young people's participation look like in Zooniverse projects? What are the projects young people choose to participate in, and what the projects they choose together? So just a little bit of background of who our participants were. So we managed to identify 104 young people in the age between 5 and 19 years old. As you see from the first graph on the left, the majority has been in the age range of 16 to 19. And also the majority happened to be, in this case, mostly female participants. They took part in 148 different projects, and they had 66,000+ contributions. Then we looked into use social network analysis to look into the projects they choose or they prefer. And we have a picture, although it does not really reflect their preferences, and I will explain why in a bit. So 3 of the projects they tend to choose together was the Project Plumage, the Plastic Tide, and Notes from Nature. And then the most popular projects in terms of number of users were again the Project Plumage, the Plastic Tide, and then a camera trap project, the Camera Catalog. Just to say that these are not purely their preferences, because we followed some strategies to identify participants. Because of the partnership with natural history museums, we tried to examine projects that were related to some extent to the Natural History Museum in London. So we targeted the projects like Project Plumage at first. And then we noticed that these projects that came up as most popular were actually promoted by the Zooniverse through newsletters like the Plastic Tide. So these things are biasing in a way what we are looking here. Also, we noticed that some of these projects are very easy to complete, which is another factor maybe that is showing that these projects are quite popular. Perhaps the only thing we can say that it shows young people's preference is the camera trap project, because these were not really targeted by us, by the project, or by Zooniverse in particular, and it came up as one of the most popular projects. Now, in terms of what young people are doing, you can see that 50% of the users had less than 200 classifications. So the majority of them are doing a few things on the platform, and a few of them, we call them super users, 12 in particular, they had more than 1,300 classifications on the platform. We checked for gender differences, but there was no difference in the number of contributions. Now, perhaps the most interesting part of this analysis was the cluster analysis Maria did, and which in a way grouped our participants, the youth we engage with, into profiles. So 5 profiles came up from this analysis. The systematic profile is users with regular visits on the platform and very active. They do a lot of tasks. Yet, as you can see in the parentheses, only 5 young people were in this group. Then moderate are users with regular visits and a few tasks. Casual do not have regular visits and they have few tasks. Lasting are connected to the platform for long, but they are not really active. And visitors, they visit once or twice and they are very active. And you can see that the majority is found in the lasting and visitors profiles. So what can we say out of this study? Well, first, I wanted to stress that this is one of the very few studies that examines young people's participation in online settings and not general participation. And what we found out is that the majority of those young people happen to be 16 to 19 years old. They are we could say that they are visiting the platform instead of systematically participating in projects, and it is not really clear, we don't have a clear picture as to which projects they prefer. I would like to close this presentation by stressing the lack or the need for online citizen science projects that are designed around the needs and preferences and skills of young people, especially the younger ones that are younger than 16 years old. And potentially those projects should be designed with an explicit learning goal in mind. Well, thank you, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Thea. So these were 2 presentations about papers that have already been published, but we also wanted to give people a chance that have not published their research yet, but have insights to share with the community. So we all know that the publication process can take a while. And so not to delay learning from research that is still going on or almost finished or stuck in this publication pipeline somewhere, we also wanted to give researchers an opportunity to share things that are not published yet. So now we hear from Till. Thank you very much, Till. So we started recording again. As I said in the chat already, this research hasn't been published yet, so we stopped recording. Yeah, so thank you all very much. I've seen some of the speakers have already been super active in replying to the questions, which is amazing. Thank you. We might come back to some of them to go into more details if we have the time. But for now, I hand over to Claire, who's going to start us off with the Q&A session.
Hi there. Thank you so much. Those 3 different projects were so very, very interesting and raised loads and loads of questions for me and for you guys too, clearly. I just want to ask each of you, first of all, a really simple thing. What will happen next for each of your projects? Where are we going to go next? Do you want to go in the order that you started? Maria, do you want to go first? what will happen next to this project?
Not sure if Maria.
Sorry, Claire, I can't hear you clearly.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I was just wondering, is that a bit better? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, a bit broken up.
Is this a bit better?
Yes.
Yeah, there we go. Take the headphones out. I really just want to know what's going to happen next for each of your projects. I'm absolutely fascinated, and they touch on such different areas of citizen science, and I just really want to know where are they going to go next.
So personally, I'm looking into the spaces that I realized that have not been reported yet in the reviewed research papers, and I am trying to have a look at the newly published papers on the topic. So some of the options, I saw that some of the presenters have already started working towards those directions, are the randomized controlled trials in classrooms with online citizen science, and of course trying to figure out how to make the pre-post test work. And I think the classroom is one of the best places to try that, because you don't get the participants leaving you in the middle of the project. They cannot do that. And some other spaces are like more long-term projects, and this is what we are trying to do in the Learn CitSci project, because it's a 4 years project, and we have engaged people, young people, as Thea said, aged 5 to 19 years old, and some of them have already been contributing for many years, like 3, 4, 5 years. So it will be interesting to see what the impact of citizen science on their learning is, and whether it has affected their agency and their interest in becoming scientists, and not only gave them some science education in the traditional way, knowledge.
But possibly an identity as a scientist as well,
yes,
that might take them forward. No, that's brilliant, thank you. Thea, what about you? Where will your project go next?
Well, I mean, as I said, it's an international project, and we are now running the last year of it. So what followed the study I talked about was that we tried to capture what young people say they learn from taking part in those projects. So we have at the moment data from in-depth interviews, a survey, and the log files that we are putting together to say something about what kind of learning may be happening in those Zooniverse projects, and in particular see whether certain design features or specific projects in a way are supporting better or in better ways learning, in particular for young people. But we don't have something that tangible, I would say, yet.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you. And Till, what about you? Where's your, obviously publishing is the first part of your next stage. Where will it go after that?
And the WT Impact project is still running, so we are not at the end of the project. And the data I presented was of the first field study. So our citizen science project is running in several field studies, and first we are going to replicate the findings, so see whether the model holds true for the different field studies. And now I presented an effect on attitudes towards science, so how participation might influence attitudes towards science, but we also want to know whether knowledge might be increased by the activity and scientific reasoning. So there are still some other effects to be tested. But I really would like to publish such findings, because I think it might be put really research forward if we consider participation on an individual level and then directly link it to individual learning outcomes.
And that's so fascinating. Thank you very much. So as Julia said, lots of the questions have been answered by you guys already. There are a couple of kind of themes that are definitely emerging in terms of the questions. So thinking about the difference between young people school participants and adult volunteers. From the different studies that you're looking at, they seem to be questions that lots of people are really interested in. So I wonder if somebody could talk a wee bit more about what you're seeing in terms of the differences between participation, impacts, attitudes, learning outcomes between those adult chosen volunteers and those school pupils that are perhaps participating in a more involuntary sort of way.
I don't think that young people are necessarily not volunteering in citizen science, because I mean, we are working in the Learn-Cit-Sci project, and we have many young people volunteering in citizen science. So there is no big difference in that. But we actually researching whether there is any difference in their participation patterns and their engagement, and what they are interested in comparison to adults. So for example, one of our recent studies looked at what young people prefer or tend to observe and contribute to iNaturalist in relation to the overall observers that are mainly adults, and there were some main differences. So I think that we have to differentiate between adults and young people, because we may need to alter the design to make it more engaging for young people to contribute. I think that Thea may be able to say a bit more about this.
Well, what I wanted to say is that our approach to sampling at the moment is based on who wants to take part in the study. It's a bit of a self-selective approach to sampling. So more likely we have people that have previous interest in science, or they have a sort of science capital, that are choosing to take part in this kind of project. So in a way, we don't have a clear picture as to how could citizen science help diverse children from diverse socioeconomic background, and in particular the disadvantaged ones, to come closer to science, learn more about science, and ideally follow a science pathway in the future. And I think those implementations that are taking place at schools can actually give us an answer to this question as to whether we can actually engage diverse audiences with science, and whether I don't know, teaching children about citizen science as a way of democratizing research, or as a way of raising their voice and taking action to support their communities from a young age, can actually lead to more responsible and more reactive citizens in the future. So I can see a value there in why to test the approaches of citizen science at school, as this can actually have an impact as to how young people are thinking, and what their role, what they think their role should be in the future in the society. So there may be a great value there if we manage to figure out a way to introduce citizen science in the curriculum.
Yeah, and just to add something, beyond the self-selected mode that we have in informal citizen science projects, it's also the fact that consenting is very difficult. So to engage students, people under 16, their parents have to consent. So, and the ethics boards that don't make it that easy as well, because in some cases you have to call them, and they may be in the other side of the world, and they have no idea that their kids opted in for this kind of research. So yeah, this is why we mainly report on 16 to 19 years old, and we only have a small proportion of under 16 students. And this is something that we can handle if we do some research in schools and classrooms.
And also, just to add one minor comment here, is also the ability of young children to reflect on whether they are learning and what they are learning. Sometimes they do not really have the ability to do this kind of metacognitive evaluation of whether they are learning and what they are learning. So an implementation within the classroom will give us, the researchers, the possibility to observe what kids are doing, and have a more, let's say, objective, I would say, account of whether they participate, how they participate and potentially what they are learning by assessing their work, if they have either this project-based or any assessment that the teacher is planning to do.
Thank you very much. We had some contributions from Jacob talking about a project they're starting, and it sounded very interesting. So I'd like to hand over to Jacob to introduce himself and the project that they are starting in Denmark. So you're muted, but now you should be able to speak.
Okay, very good. So hello everyone, I'm Jacobson and I'm from Denmark, and where we have a project called Science at Home, which is a collection of online citizen science games. We've had something like 300,000 people playing over the past 3 or 5 years, and what we have been testing over the past 3 years is how to take these online games and implement them into into school curriculum, and been testing sort of so for the past couple of years been testing how it works, and now we're sort of ready to set up a randomized control trial with sort of something like 150 schools, in which we test various different sort of both implicit and explicit learning outcomes for this. And what we've been focusing on is very much sort of creating the very clear link between the complex interactions that you have in a citizen science interaction, because it comes from research, and then the core curriculum component. So creating a very clear link between those two. And then we argue sort of very heavily that citizen science is a means of sort of implementing inquiry-based science education, but in a way which is much more authentic, in the sense that inquiry-based science education is often very successful, but also sort of a little bit like a role-playing game, where the students find out in the end that they are that their challenge that they are pursuing is actually known to some extent, and citizen science can be this much more authentic way of doing it. So what we're trying to focus on is to create new digital tools to facilitate a much more sort of rich classroom experience, in which they don't only sort of engage in particular sort of components of the scientific cycle, but in as many as possible. And so we're trying to design digital tools that facilitates them participating in both the hypothesis, discussion, analysis, and also the scientific writing process, so that in a single sort of unit, they generate some data, can analyze the data, and then they can also collectively discuss that, and it ends up with them then collectively writing a report, in which they also sort of have a citation mechanism where they can sort of cite each other's observations. And so that's how we're trying to sort of use citizen science to support engagement within all sort of steps of the scientific cycle, to create as rich an interaction as possible. So it's called Science at Home, and we call it ReGame, so research enabling game-based education that we're trying to test with that.
Thank you very much for doing this so spontaneously. Feel free to share the link in the chat so that people can have a look at it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think we're kind of running out of time. I'd like to use the last couple of minutes to thank our speakers. Thank ECSA and EU-Citizen.Science for their support in setting this up and making sure that everything is running and you can actually see us and hear us and contribute the way you did. Especially to Tim Woods, Simone Rufenacht and Barbara Canero for the social media support and the technical support. That's been just amazing. Thank you guys. Yeah, the other thing that I mentioned at the beginning and that I would really like to come back to is the opportunity to shape the future of this webinars, make this actually into a series and not a one-off event. So what we are trying to do is broaden this up to make sure that everyone can participate and suggest topics, so that we broaden this up for people who are interested in sharing their research, sharing their experience. As you've seen, it doesn't have to be published, but it can be published already before you share it, and there are various options. So we will put a link to a Google form in the chat, so that you can actually contribute topics that you would like us to discuss and speakers that you would suggest. And just to make this very clear, if you have something to share, feel free to suggest yourself as a speaker. That's absolutely fine. So yeah, that was our first webinar. I hope you enjoyed the topic and hearing from our speakers. And we would like to welcome you back, and maybe you want to contribute more. So thank you very much.
I think that Julia froze. Thank you very much, Julia, for organizing this, and Claire. It was very nice for us to contribute to this very first webinar and share our work and share some experiences with you. So I don't know whether Claire wants to say something to wrap it up.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, a huge thank you to all the participants. Your research is super interesting, and I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say there's things in there that I'm desperate to know more about from all three of you. But yes, thank you for coming, and we really want this series of webinars to be something that is very much led by the group. So what's important to you guys and what we want to talk about, you tell us, and we'll make that happen. We want it very much to be a discursive and inclusive series of events. So again, thank you ever so much for coming, and hopefully we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, and at the end of the webinar, actually my internet cut out. So I'm just now sending the link to the form. Very sorry about the delay.